The STR Club, Manhattan, February 1946. When Lucky Luciano entered the VIP room, all the mobsters at the table rose to their feet, except for one. Bumpy Johnson remained seated, his cigar lit, his gaze fixed on the man who had just united the entire Italian Mafia. Luciano's bodyguards reached for their weapons, but Luciano raised his hand, for the black man opposite him controlled something Luciano needed more than brute force: the illegal gambling business in Harlem. And what Bumpy said in the next 60 seconds would either forge an alliance that would change organized crime forever, or ignite a war that would stain New York streets with blood. February 1946, World War II was over, and America was celebrating. But in the smoky back rooms of New York City, another war was brewing. Lucky Luciano, the man who had modernized the Mafia, had been released from Danora prison after 9 years. The government had offered him a deal. Help us win the war by using your connections to the Italian docks, and we'll reduce your sentence. Luciano had delivered, but there was a catch: deportation. In less than 3 weeks, the federal authorities would send him back to Italy for good. And Luciano, true to form, wouldn't leave without securing his empire. The 5 families were under control. Frank Costello ran the Luciano family in his absence. Vito Genovese was plotting from Italy. Albert Anastasia controlled the docks. Everything was in place except for one problem: Harlem, the illegal numbers lottery. The illegal lottery, which brought in millions every week, was booming in Harlem, and the Italians wanted a piece of the action. They had tried back in 1935 when Dutch Schultz had forced his way into the business. But Schultz had made a fatal mistake. He had underestimated a taciturn, elegantly dressed debt collector named Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Schultz was eventually shot dead in a New Jersey bar. 11 years later, Luciano wanted what Schultz couldn't take. But Luciano was smarter than Schultz. He knew you couldn't just walk into Harlem with guns blazing. You had to talk first. You had to show respect. You had to make an offer. So, Luciano sent word to Bumpy Johnson: "Let's meet." Bumpy didn't reply for a week. That alone told Luciano everything he needed to know. This wasn't going to be easy. The Stork Club on East 53rd Street was the most exclusive nightclub in Manhattan. Frank Sinatra performed there. J. Edgar Hoover drank there. And on the evening of February 18th, 1946, Lucky Luciano reserved the entire VIP room. He brought 6 men with him: Frank Costello, his acting boss; Albert Anastasia, the executioner; Mir Lansky, the accountant; 3 bodyguards who had killed more men than they could count. Bumpy Johnson entered the club alone. He was 40 years old and wore a tailored 3-piece navy suit with a crisp white shirt. No tie. He never wore ties. A gold watch chain hung from his waistcoat pocket. His hair was freshly cut, his shoes gleaming. He carried a leather briefcase in his right hand. The bodyguards approached him, their hands reaching for their weapons, but Luciano raised a finger. "Let him through." Bumpy walked past them without a glance, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He pulled out a chair at the head of the table, the seat usually reserved for the boss, and sat down. He placed his briefcase on the table and took out a cigar. No one moved. Costello's jaw tightened. Anastasia's hand moved to his waistband, but Luciano only smiled because he saw what Bumpy was up to. This wasn't disrespect. This was a test. Bumpy set the terms of the conversation before anyone even spoke. Luciano took the seat directly across from him. "Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming." Bumpy lit his cigar, took a deep drag, and blew the smoke toward the ceiling. "Mr. Luciano, you wanted to talk, so talk." Luciano folded his hands on the table. His voice was calm, deliberate, the voice of a man who had negotiated with presidents and gangsters and knew the difference between the two. "I'm leaving the country in 3 weeks. The federal authorities are sending me back to Italy. But before I go, I need to make sure everything stays in order in New York. No wars, no chaos, just business." Bumpy nodded slowly, said nothing. "Harlem is the final piece of the puzzle," Luciano continued. "Illegal gambling brings in millions. My people want to get involved, but I know you do. They've been pulling the strings at the top since the short selling collapsed. They have the community's trust. They have the infrastructure. They have the police on their payroll." He paused and looked Bumpy straight in the eye. "I'm not here to take anything away from you, Bumpy. I'm offering you a partnership. You run Harlem. We provide protection, investment capital, and contacts. In return, we get 40% of the profits. You remain independent, but under our protection." Silence fell over the room. Frank Costello leaned forward, watching Bumpy's reaction. Meyer Lansky's fingers drummed softly on the table. Albert Anastasia rubbed his knuckles. Bumpy took another drag on his cigar. "What happens if I say no?" Luciano's smile didn't waver, but his gaze turned cold. "Then we have a problem, because whoever isn't for us is against us, and nobody survives being against us." It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound heated. It sounded with the absolute certainty of a man who had built an empire on precisely this principle. Bumpy placed his cigar in the crystal ashtray, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a single photograph. He slid it across the table. Luciano picked it up. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened around the edges. The photograph showed a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, one of Anastasia's gambling centers, and in front of it, shaking hands with a well-known police captain, stood Albert Anastasia himself. "This photo was taken 3 days ago," Bumpy said quietly. "I have 12 more that look exactly the same. Different warehouses, different police officers, other members of your organization." A deathly silence fell over the room. Costello's hand moved to his jacket. Anastasia half stood up, but Luciano just stared at him. Luciano looked at the photograph and then at Bumpy. "Are you threatening me?" he asked. "No," Bumpy said. "I'm showing you respect because I could have sent these photos to the district attorney. I could have sent them to the newspapers. I could have wiped your entire business off the map before you even knew I had them. But I didn't." He leaned forward. "You came to Harlem wanting a partnership, but a partnership means equality. And what you just offered me wasn't a partnership. It was a takeover with a smile." Luciano put the photo aside. For the first time since Bumpy had entered the room, he seemed genuinely impressed. "So, what do you want?" Luciano asked. Bumpy picked up his cigar, took a slow drag, and let the question hang in the air. "You want what Schultz wanted, what every Italian gang that ever set its sights on Harlem wanted. Control. But you can't have it. Not because you're not smart enough, not because you're not strong enough, because Harlem isn't yours." He gestured out the window at the uptown lights. "Do you know why Schultz failed? Because he thought black people were stupid. He thought we'd just give you our money and say thank you. He thought brute force was enough. But that's not how Harlem works. You need trust. You need respect. You have to be one of us. And you never will be one of us." Costello started to say something, but Luciano silenced him with a look. Bumpy continued. "But listen, you asked for 40%. You can have 10%. 10% of the profits, not as protection money, but as a service fee. You provide banking services. We need clean money to pay out the winners when the big numbers come in. You provide legal assistance when our runners are arrested. In return, you get 10% of the net profits." He leaned back, his voice deepening. "And one more thing. You never, and I mean never, send your people into Harlem to collect the money. If you want your money, you send a courier to my office. I'll have it counted, packaged, and ready. But your soldiers won't patrol my streets. Your weapons won't appear in my neighborhood. Harlem stays black. Harlem stays mine. That's the deal." There was absolute silence. Lansky broke it first. He turned to Luciano. "Charlie, this is actually a clever move. 10% for practically no risk. No cost, no disclosure. Clean money?" Anastasia wasn't convinced. "And what's stopping him from disinheriting us once we've set up the bank account?" Bumpy answered before Luciano could say anything. "The same thing that stops you from taking Harlem by force, a stalemate. If you try to cheat me, the photos will be public and your political protection will be gone. If I try to cheat you, you'll target me. With everything you have, we both lose, and we'll both be rich. Your choice." Lucky Luciano stared at Bumpy Johnson for what felt like an eternity. Then he began to laugh slowly, not a mocking laugh, but an honest one. "You know what, Bumpy? Schultz was an idiot. He should have talked to you first." He stood up and offered his hand. 10% bank and legal protection, no soldiers in Harlem, and you deliver the money monthly." Bumpy stood up, shook his hand firmly. "Deal." Frank Costello breathed a sigh of relief. Lansky smiled. Even Anastasia sat back down. The tension in the room had dissipated. Luciano held Bumpy's hand for another moment. "Look, Bumpy, I've done business with presidents, cops, union bosses, and hitmen. But you're the first person to come to my table and say no without pulling a gun. That takes guts or stupidity. I'm not sure yet. Bumpy smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Let me know when you figure it out. 3 weeks later, Lucky Luciano boarded a ship to Italy. He never returned to American soil, but the deal with Bumpy Johnson lasted for the next 22 years. The illegal numbers lottery flourished. Bumpy paid the 10% on time. The Italians provided bank protection, legitimate front companies. When Bumpy was arrested in 1951, after his incarceration in Alcatraz, Frank Costello personally ensured his family was provided for. And when Bumpy was released from prison in 1963, the agreement was still in place. The Store Club meeting became legendary in organized crime circles. Not because of violence, not because of threats, but because two men from completely different worlds came together and found a way to do business without destroying each other. Luciano later told business associates in Italy, "Bumpy Johnson was the smartest gangster I ever met, and the most dangerous because he didn't need my respect, he demanded it." Bumpy never spoke publicly about the meeting, but people close to him said he kept the photo of Anastasia in his office for the rest of his life. Not as a threat, but as a reminder. Power isn't about who pulls the trigger first. It's about who's smart enough not to. If this story of respect, strategy, and the alliance that changed the underworld has inspired you, subscribe to the channel and give us a like. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the man who brought the mafia to its knees outside Harlem. And tell me in the comments what you would have done in that room. Keep fighting for your crown, and I'll see you next time.